Richard Roundtree didn't just play Shaft. He proved that black cool could carry a blockbuster. He became an icon before the industry knew what to do with one. Michael Gambon could walk into any room, stage, screen, it didn't matter, and make it his. Betty White worked for 8 decades and never once let them see the effort. She made longevity look effortless. It wasn't. Whitney Houston had the greatest voice of her generation. She also had the greatest burden, the gap between the gift the world demanded and the person trying to survive it. Elvis Presley became so large as a symbol that the actual man inside it, complicated, isolated, human, almost disappeared entirely. Richard Lewis turned his own anxiety and pain into 40 years of comedy. He gave the audience his damage and called it a gift. There is a moment that defined Oprah Winfrey before almost anyone outside of Chicago had heard her name. It was 1986. Phil Donahue owned daytime television. He was smart, issue-driven, politically serious, the gold standard. And then a show out of Chicago started quietly eating his ratings. Not because it was louder, not because it was flashier, because the woman hosting it did something Donahue never quite managed. She made every single person in that studio audience feel like the most important person in the room. That instinct, the ability to collapse the distance between a television host and a human being watching at home, is the engine behind everything Oprah Winfrey has built. But engines run hot, and the cost of running that particular engine at that particular scale for that many decades is a story that gets far less airtime than the applause. She was born January 29, 1954, in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was unmarried and 19 years old. The circumstances were poor in the most literal sense of the word. No running water. A grandmother, Hattie Mae, who was strict and religious, and by Oprah's own public account, the first person who made her feel that her mind was worth something. Oprah has described learning to read before the age of 3. By kindergarten, she was writing letters to her teacher, asking to be moved to a higher grade. The teacher agreed. That early hunger for recognition, for intellectual belonging, never left her. But the childhood wasn't a straight line toward triumph. Her mother moved to Milwaukee. Oprah was shuffled between households. She has spoken publicly and repeatedly about suffering sexual abuse as a child at the hands of male relatives. She has talked about running away at 13, about a pregnancy at 14 that ended with the baby dying shortly after birth, something she disclosed on air herself decades later at a moment of her own choosing. These are not rumored details. They are facts she has offered publicly on her own terms as part of a larger argument she was always making, that where you start does not fix where you end. She arrived at her father Vernon Winfrey's house in Nashville as a teenager, and the discipline he imposed, reading lists, grades, a curfew, the expectation of excellence, gave structure to the ambition that had always been there. At 17, she was hired by a local radio station. At 19, she was co-anchoring the local news at WTVF in Nashville, becoming the first black female co-anchor in that market's history. That is where most biographies pause and insert a swelling musical moment. But here is what actually happened next. She got moved to the morning talk format because the station didn't think she was polished enough for hard news. She cried. She has said that publicly. And then she discovered that the morning talk format was the thing she had always been built for, without knowing it. By 1983, she was in Chicago, hosting a low-rated half-hour morning show called AM Chicago. Within a month, she had turned its ratings around. Within a year, it expanded to a full hour and was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. By 1986, the year Phil Donahue's dominance began to crack, it went national. The show ran for 25 years. 276 episodes a season at its peak. 47 Emmy Awards. An estimated audience of 48 million viewers a week in the United States alone. Broadcast in more than 145 countries. Those numbers are real, and they are also almost impossible to feel. So consider this instead. Oprah Winfrey's on-air book recommendations moved books from mid-list obscurity to the top of the bestseller charts within hours. Publishers restructured their business models around the possibility of her attention. She created, almost by accident, the single most powerful literary marketing force in American publishing history. But the show was not a smooth machine. It was a negotiation, ongoing, exhausting, and not always clean, between what the audience wanted, what the advertisers needed, what the guests required, and what the host herself could sustain. In 1988, she appeared on the cover of People magazine after losing 67 pounds. She pulled a wagon of animal fat on stage to represent the weight she had shed. It was one of the most watched episodes in the show's history, and she has since called it one of her greatest regrets. Not because she was wrong to care about her health, but because the spectacle of it, the performance of thinness as victory, set up a decade of public struggle with weight that she did not choose and could not fully control. The tabloids turned her body into a recurring storyline. She has been candid many times and in many contexts about the relationship between that public scrutiny, emotional eating, and the trauma underneath it. She didn't just have a weight story. She had a story about what happens when your most private vulnerabilities become public entertainment, and you are also the one producing the entertainment. That tension is the defining contradiction of Oprah Winfrey's career. She built an empire on radical vulnerability. She pioneered a mode of television that asked guests, and herself, to expose pain in front of millions of people. And she did it with such evident care and such genuine empathy that it never quite looked like exploitation, even when critics argued that it was. In 1998, she produced and starred in Beloved, an adaptation of Toni Morrison's novel. It was a film she had spent a decade trying to get made, a project she described as the most important work of her career. It was a box office failure. It opened against Bride of Chucky and lost. She has said the experience devastated her. She took time away to recalibrate, and when she came back with a different understanding of what her platform actually was and what it was not. The show was the platform. The show was the thing. Everything else, the magazine, the production company Harpo Productions, the eventual network OWN, grew from that center. But the show also required something specific of her: emotional availability, every single week, for 25 years. She has talked in interviews about the discipline required to walk onto that stage present, open, ready to receive whatever the guests brought, regardless of what she was carrying personally. Stedman Graham has been her partner since 1986. They became engaged in 1992. They never married. Oprah has explained this directly. She believed the institution of marriage would have altered the relationship in ways she didn't want, and that her career, at the scale she was pursuing it, required a kind of primacy she couldn't honestly share. She has said she would not have been a good wife, not at that level of ambition. That is not a self-deprecating deflection. It is a precise, honest assessment of what her choices have cost, and what she decided was worth the cost. She has also been public about not having children, a choice she has framed not as sacrifice, but as clarity. She has spoken about her bond with the girls at her Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa, founded in 2007, as one of the deepest of her life. The school was born out of a conversation with Nelson Mandela and has educated hundreds of young women. When allegations of abuse at the school emerged in its first year, Oprah flew to South Africa and addressed them directly, in public, without deflection. The handling of that crisis said something real about who she is under pressure. The cattle industry lawsuit is another piece of that picture. In 1998, after a show about the potential spread of mad cow disease, a group of Texas cattlemen sued her under a food disparagement law, seeking millions in damages. She moved the entire production of her show to Amarillo, Texas, for the duration of the trial, broadcast from there every day while the lawsuit was live. She won. But the episode revealed something about her that the warm mythology sometimes obscures. She is not soft. She has resources and she uses them. And when she decides to stand on something, she does not quietly settle to make the noise go away. Her public support of Barack Obama in 2007 and 2008 was historic in scale. A study published in the Journal of Marketing Research estimated that her endorsement generated approximately 1 million additional votes for Obama in the 2008 Democratic primary. That number is contested, but credible enough to have been taken seriously. It also cost her. Her approval ratings dropped after the endorsement. A portion of her audience felt she had crossed a line. She made the calculation anyway. When the Oprah Winfrey Show ended in 2011, the final episode was quiet. Just her, alone on stage, talking. No celebrity guests. No spectacle. She spoke about gratitude and responsibility and the weight of attention. It felt for a moment like a conclusion. It wasn't. OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, launched in 2011, the same year the show ended. The early years were difficult. Ratings were soft. There were public reports of internal turmoil and executive turnover. Critics questioned whether the brand could survive without the show as its engine. Then Tyler Perry signed an exclusive content deal with OWN, and the network found its audience. By 2013, it was profitable. The recovery was real, and it was not automatic. She returned to acting, receiving an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for her performance in Lee Daniels' The Butler in 2013. Her work in that film was specific and controlled, and utterly without vanity, the opposite of celebrity self-presentation. She continued producing, continued investing. Her equity stake in Weight Watchers purchased in 2015, increased the company's stock value by more than 100% in a single day. That is not a metaphor. That is a measurable market event caused by one person's association with a brand. In 2018, she gave a speech at the Golden Globes that prompted a genuine national conversation about whether she would run for president. She did not run. She addressed it directly and on her own timeline. The question itself was a mirror. It showed how completely she had come to occupy a particular space in American public life. The space of moral authority, of someone the culture trusts to name what is actually happening. Whether that trust is fully warranted is a fair question. The wellness content she has promoted over the years has drawn serious criticism from doctors and scientists. The platform she gave to Dr. Mehmet Oz before his own public fall from credibility was significant and has not been fully reckoned with. She has acknowledged some of this, not always with the depth her critics want, but more than the mythology requires. That is the actual shape of Oprah Winfrey, the one that lives underneath the brand. A woman of exceptional intelligence and exceptional discipline, who made a series of very deliberate choices about what to trade and what to keep, who understood that vulnerability was a currency and spent it wisely, who built something genuinely unprecedented, not just a career, but an institution, and paid for it in ways that were real and documented and still ongoing. She is not finished. She still produces. She still speaks. She still carries, in her public presence, that original instinct, the one that started in Chicago in 1983, that every person watching is worth the full weight of her attention. That is the image. And behind it, most of the time, it's actually true. That's the rarest thing about her. Not the wealth, not the influence, not the cultural saturation. The fact that the version of Oprah the world fell in love with is, by most available evidence, the real one. Just harder, costlier, and quieter than it looks from the outside.